The war in Ukraine represents a significant escalation in Russia's ongoing conflict with the West. Since the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russia has felt increasingly threatened by NATO's eastward expansion. The annexation of Crimea in 2014 was a clear warning sign, a demonstration of Russia's willingness to use force to achieve its objectives. The current conflict in Ukraine marks a dangerous turning point. It is not simply a regional conflict but a direct challenge to the post-Cold War security architecture in Europe. Putin's actions have shattered the illusion of peace and stability that the continent had enjoyed for decades. The specter of nuclear war, once a distant nightmare, has now re-emerged as a chilling possibility. Russia's nuclear arsenal, a legacy of its Soviet past, gives it a dangerous trump card in any confrontation with the West. The current situation demands a clear-eyed assessment of the risks involved and a firm, resolute response from the West. The future of international security hangs in the balance. A prominent Russian think tank recently proposed conducting demonstrative nuclear explosions. This proposal reflects a growing sense of desperation and recklessness within certain circles of the Russian elite. It is a clear attempt to intimidate the West and deter further support for Ukraine. The proposal calls for detonating a nuclear device in a remote, uninhabited area, such as the Arctic or over the Pacific Ocean. The purported aim is to demonstrate Russia's resolve and its willingness to cross the nuclear threshold if necessary. The international community must condemn this proposal in the strongest possible terms. Such an act would have profound and irreversible consequences, not just for Russia, but for the entire world. The West faces a daunting challenge in responding to Russia's nuclear saber-rattling. On the one hand, it must demonstrate resolve and unwavering support for Ukraine. Any sign of weakness or hesitation will be interpreted as a victory by Putin and embolden him to escalate further. On the other hand, the West must avoid actions that could inadvertently lead to a direct confrontation with Russia, a nuclear-armed power. The current strategy can best be described as one of calibrated deterrence. The West has imposed crippling economic sanctions on Russia, targeting its financial system, energy sector, and oligarchic elite. At the same time, NATO has bolstered its military presence in Eastern Europe, deploying troops and equipment to reassure allies and deter any potential Russian aggression. The goal is to provide Ukraine with the means to defend itself without triggering a wider conflict. The stakes are incredibly high, and the margin for error is razor-thin. While the West has largely presented a united front against Russia, cracks have begun to appear in the alliance. Different countries have varying levels of exposure to Russia, economic ties, and historical experiences, leading to a spectrum of opinions on how to best manage the crisis. Some NATO members, particularly those in Eastern Europe, with direct borders with Russia, advocate for a more aggressive response, including the provision of heavier weaponry to Ukraine, and even the imposition of a no-fly zone. Others, particularly some Western European nations, are more cautious, fearing that such actions could provoke Russia and lead to a wider war. These divisions within NATO are not insurmountable, but they do complicate the alliance's efforts to formulate a coherent and effective response. Maintaining unity within NATO is crucial in the face of Russian aggression. It is essential for NATO members to overcome their differences and present a united front, both in terms of military deterrence and political messaging. Section 5. Sending a message: the significance of defensive weaponry for Ukraine. The West's decision to provide Ukraine with defensive weapons is a critical element of its strategy. These weapons, which include anti-tank missiles, anti-aircraft systems, and small arms, are not intended to transform Ukraine into a military powerhouse capable of defeating Russia. Instead, they serve a more strategic purpose: to raise the costs of Russia's invasion and make it clear that aggression will not be tolerated. The provision of these weapons sends a powerful message to both Russia and Ukraine. To Russia, it signals that the West will not stand idly by as it seeks to redraw the map of Europe by force. To Ukraine, it demonstrates the West's commitment to its sovereignty and its right to self-defense. These weapons have already had a significant impact on the battlefield, enabling Ukrainian forces to inflict heavy casualties on Russian troops and slow their advance. Section 6. A global shadow: the wider implications of nuclear brinkmanship. The current standoff between Russia and the West has far-reaching implications that extend well beyond the borders of Ukraine. One of the most concerning aspects of this crisis is the return of nuclear brinkmanship. Russia's thinly veiled threats to use nuclear weapons have shattered the taboo that has surrounded these weapons since the end of the Cold War. This dangerous rhetoric has heightened global anxieties and increased the risk of miscalculation or accident. The possibility, however remote, of a nuclear exchange between Russia and NATO is a nightmare scenario that could have catastrophic consequences for humanity. The conflict has also exacerbated existing geopolitical tensions, particularly between the United States and China. The economic consequences of the conflict are already being felt worldwide, with sanctions against Russia disrupting global supply chains and leading to shortages of essential goods. Section 7. The price of escalation. Potential consequences for the world. The consequences of a further escalation in the conflict between Russia and the West are almost too terrible to contemplate. A direct military confrontation between NATO and Russia, even if unintended, could quickly spiral out of control, leading to a catastrophic nuclear exchange. The use of even a single nuclear weapon would have devastating humanitarian and environmental consequences, potentially triggering a global nuclear winter. Beyond the immediate destruction and loss of life, a nuclear conflict would have long-lasting effects on the planet and its inhabitants. Radioactive fallout would contaminate vast areas, rendering them uninhabitable for generations. The global climate would be severely disrupted, leading to widespread famine and disease. Even if a full-blown nuclear war is averted, a protracted conflict in Ukraine would have severe consequences for the region and the world. The global economy would continue to suffer, with supply chains further disrupted and energy prices soaring. Section 8. A world on edge. Navigating the uncertain path ahead. The world watches with bated breath as the crisis in Ukraine unfolds, uncertain of what the future holds. The situation remains highly volatile and unpredictable, with the potential for miscalculation or escalation ever present. The stakes are incredibly high, not just for Ukraine and its people, but for the entire international community. Diplomacy, however difficult, must remain the priority. Channels of communication between Russia and the West must be kept open, and every effort must be made to find a negotiated settlement that addresses the legitimate security concerns of all parties involved. The international community must stand united in its condemnation of Russia's aggression and its unwavering support for Ukraine. The choices we make in the days and weeks ahead will determine the course of events for generations to come.